there have been several studies that have analyzed the metabolic health of adults in America, and they're coming up with just incredible numbers that 80 to 90% of adults have at least one symptom or sign of metabolic dysfunction.
Welcome to another episode of Executive Health and Life. I'm your host, Julian Hayes II. Dr. Robert Lufkin, thank you so much for joining me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I always have to start off a little differently. And so I'm curious, during your time being a medical school professor, what was some of your favorite aspects about that?
Wow, that's a great question, Julian. First of all, being a medical school professor, I've been doing that essentially my whole career, and last time I checked, I still have my job, but it's really it's a wonderful experience because as a physician, it allows me to practice medicine, so I can actually see patients and take care of them, and then secondly, I get to do research. So, over the years, my lab has received literally millions of dollars in grants from drug companies, device makers, and the government, all of which I'll be critical of in the next hour. But to be clear, I've received many, grants from them and written literally hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers that have been published and textbooks and all that. And that was super fun. And the third part of being a professor is actually teaching and interacting with medical students and other doctors in training or other healthcare professionals. And oftentimes is not, while I was supposed to be teaching, oftentimes is not, I'd be learning from them by their questions they ask and by their insightful comments. So that's probably the best part of it, just interacting with the new people, the young minds that are entering the space without the preconceived notions that that many of us have, sort of that beginner's mind that they talk about in Zen, where people go and they ask the obvious questions that nobody else asks.
Absolutely. And I was looking forward also to this conversation because, listeners already know I had a brief flirtation with medical school after 1 year. And I'm just even during that time, a lot of ideas popped up in my head of how we can make the overall curriculum better. So I'm curious with you, if someone said that you can rewrite the curriculum for medical schools globally, what 3 subjects or things off the top of your head would you include and make mandatory that you think would make better physicians?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a fan of Western medicine, and I'm part of Western medicine. I'm part of the problem really by being there, and and I think looking back in the 20th century, Western medicine transformed the lives of pretty much everybody in the world and made life better for people, largely through eliminating infectious diseases and in public health measures. But it was really, a golden age for medicine when pills and surgeries were developed that just made our lives so much better. And even today, a quarter of the way into the 21st century, if I get hit by a car, I'm going to want Western medicine to, give me a blood transfusion and maybe, remove my spleen if it's ruptured and this kind of thing. So for acute management of problems, Western medicine, has no equal worldwide. But the problem is, and the problem that I talk about in the book is that in the 21st century, we're now facing a literal tsunami of diseases that while they were around in the 20th century, they're nowhere near the numbers today. These are so-called chronic diseases, and they're now literally in biblical numbers that we've never before seen in the history of the human race. And these diseases, and it's a seemingly heterogeneous group of diseases, all the way from obesity to diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, even mental illness. They're all just expanding incredibly. And the problem is, When Western medicine takes the same pills and surgeries that were so effective in the 20th century, that same strategy, just treat it, they work for in many cases, they can be life-saving, but oftentimes they only treat the symptoms. In other words, they may save the life acutely, but underneath, the disease continues to progress. And what does that mean? It means somehow we're missing the root cause, the common mechanism. And what I think the common mechanism is based on lifestyle, and it's arguably the most powerful medicine that most of us will ever take, and it can do things that the pills and surgery, at least at this point, can't do, because all the diseases I mentioned, all the chronic diseases, I would like to submit and make the argument for that they're based on common metabolic abnormalities, common disease drivers, things like insulin resistance, inflammation, oxidation, these things that really drive all these diseases. And it's an interesting thing. So that means that the same lifestyle approach that will help me lose weight will also improve my chances to decrease Alzheimer's disease or all these other things. And so it's really fascinating. So long answer for short question, but to your question, I think I would really focus on the value of lifestyle, that nutrition, plays a role. You mentioned it briefly. We didn't get a lot of nutrition in medical school, and sadly we still don't. Nutrition, but how lifestyle can be transformative. And then just the third thing, the final thought would be that prevention is key. That the chronic diseases I mentioned don't start when the doctor diagnoses them. They start years to decades beforehand. So we need to start these lifestyle changes before we get diagnosed if we want the maximum effect.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that notion about chronic diseases lying dormant for years, and kind of the disconnect to communicate that with people, that a lot of times you might feel fine in this moment, but it doesn't necessarily mean internally that everything is fine. But to also piggyback on what you said about Western medicine, I'm actually a fan of it too, but there's nuances. Western medicine gave me so many extra years with my father because of he was on dialysis and a bunch of other issues. And if this was maybe even 30 years ago, I wouldn't have got all those extra years. So in that instance, I'm eternally grateful for Western medicine. And, so there's always caveats and nuances with that. And I think we can go ahead and start diving into some of the various health lies that you mentioned in the book. And I think the first great place to start is metabolism and metabolic health. And when someone comes to you and they say, what does being metabolic healthy look like to you? How would you classify that to them?
Yeah, it's a great question that's particularly relevant now today, because there have been several studies that have analyzed the metabolic health of adults in America, and they're coming up with just incredible numbers that 80 to 90% of adults have at least one symptom or sign of metabolic dysfunction. And there are about 5 things that are markers for these that we can look at to begin with. They were described by Gerald Raven at Stanford University when he described something he called syndrome X, or metabolic syndrome, which is really insulin resistance and inflammation. But it's things like your abdominal, your waist size, literally. Do you have extra inches around your waist? And today, of course, we know most adults in the U.S. are either overweight or obese. So the answer would be yes for that. The other thing is blood pressure. Today, most adults at least have hypertension or are being treated for hypertension. It's close to 50% or over 50%. So that's another marker. And then there are some blood markers, things like glucose, which measure our response to glucose, our glucose metabolism, really, and insulin resistance. And then other things like HDL, which is the good kind of cholesterol, or triglyceride, which is another blood marker, which is associated with cardiovascular disease, but it's also strongly associated with metabolic disease. If we look at these markers, most people, the vast majority of people, will have at least one of these as abnormal.
Mm-hmm. And do you see also when it comes to that, when you combine A1C, insulin, the fasting glucose, and you mentioned the triglycerides, do you think that's a complete picture, or are there some other markers beyond that that also ties into it? Because what I'm thinking of is also fatty liver and how that's rising as well. And a lot of that is connected to the metabolic health as well.
Yeah, and fatty liver. I mean, the chronic disease list I gave was a long list, but still it's short because I didn't mention sleep apnea. I didn't mention polycystic ovary disease. I didn't mention inflammatory bowel disease. I didn't mention fatty liver. And these are all also linked at this basic metabolic level and their manifestations of them. So for sure, these markers are just the beginnings. And as we talk about in the book, it's not enough just to fix the lifestyle. In some cases, it may be a deficiency. It might be something like vitamin D. It might be some other hormone that we're deficient in. There may be other abnormalities that are driving these metabolic dysfunction. So it's not always just necessarily our diet or our sleep or our exercise or our stress, but those are the number one drivers that we can all control every day because we control our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And piggybacking on that, some of the other issues that I've seen is also now the information that people are getting in terms of what are the recommendations given out by USDA and then food pyramids and all sorts of things. And those are not exactly metabolic friendly diets to most people because they're way too sedentary to be able to handle that type of recommendations that's being given to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. Our supposedly trusted medical institutions are, I don't want to say hopelessly, but they're seriously corrupted by both conscious, unconscious, pernicious financial and other incentives that drive them to say things that may not be in our best interest or lead to our best health. You mentioned the food pyramid, which is put out periodically by the USDA. It's the recommendations of what kind of food to eat. We've all seen it. It's a pyramid like this. You're supposed to eat the bottom line, most of those, and then as you go up the pyramid, you eat fewer and fewer of those. Well, Nina Teicholz recently published a paper showing that the most recent USDA committee writing the food recommendations for the food pyramid, 90% of the people had conflicts with big food or junk food makers, basically. And well, what's the result of that? The food pyramid emphasizes junk foods. You look at the bottom row and it's all cereals, grains, and baked goods and basically junk food that drives our metabolic illness. And you say, well, who cares about the food pyramid? Well, the food pyramid drives it's the guidepost for what our kids are fed at school. It's what is served in hospitals. It's what our prisoners are fed, what our military, what our veterans are fed, and indeed all around the world, people follow the food pyramid as a trusted source of information. Similarly, another one, American Heart Association, the sort of the leading institution for heart disease and cardiovascular disease. Well, they were famously funded in the 1950s by a grant from Procter & Gamble, who's the maker of one of the original junk seed oils called Crisco. And these oils are very pro-inflammatory. And while they do slightly lower the LDL, their untoward effects, in my opinion, by far outweigh that. And today we have the American Heart Association recommending on their website that people that use corn oil, which is another junk seed oil, which drives inflammation and oxidation, and they say it's heart healthy, and they will actually sell those labels to companies, like junk food cereals have them on them that say heart healthy, lower your cholesterol, this sort of thing. it goes on and on. The American Diabetic Association is similarly, in my opinion, corrupted by these influences to the point that they give information that I believe is not in the best interest of the patients. The American Dietetic Association also has a very storied past with influences that drive it not to give the best recommendations to its followers. I mean, my mom was a dietitian. I know. I was raised in that environment. She would go to dietitian conferences and they would be sponsored by Coca-Cola and McDonald's. I mean, go figure.
Yeah. Oh man. I've had to really practice my patience at times when it came to dealing with different hospital dietitians and recommendations given to family members. It's been a real test of my patience. I definitely can remember these moments, but before we go back to that, there's something that comes to the top of my mind. There's two things. The first thing is where was this exact moment where you're kind of looking at the whole medical landscape differently, and what did these lenses start to reveal themselves? And it's almost like seeing a whole new world.
For me, well, yeah, again, great question. I was, full disclosure, I was minding my own business being a medical school professor for many, many years, just doing my thing, like I talked about before, minding my own business, really. And I'd like to say I came upon this because I wanted to make the world a better place. Well, no, not really. I was forced into this when I came down with 4 of these chronic diseases myself. So I went to my doctors and they prescribed prescription medicines for them, the pills, to take care of them. And, I asked them, well, what about lifestyle? Does lifestyle work? And they said, nah, not really. It doesn't work. You're going to be on these pills for the rest of your life. So get used to it. So at that point, it forced me to go back to the research and realize that many things that I believed and many of my colleagues believed were incorrect. There's been a revolution in our knowledge about how these diseases were all linked, and the things we talked about, how lifestyle at the root does make a difference. And long story short, I began changing my own lifestyle, and lo and behold, I realized I went back to my doctors and they couldn't believe it. They thought the labs were broken, and basically I got off all 4 medications, and through lifestyle I was able to reverse those chronic diseases that I had. And now really I made it my mission in my life to help other people take back their health and not make the same mistakes that I did, and hopefully understand the power of lifestyle and how these chronic diseases can be reversed or put off.
Mm-hmm. Now, did those doctors, after you made your changes, are they now prescribing lifestyle to more of their patients now, and you're surrounding people that saw this transformation from you?
I wish I could say, yeah, everybody changed, but no, I mean, it's, an N of 1 doesn't make it. But let me be clear. In the book, it's not just about me and my experience. I'm a scientist like anybody. And so these are not my ideas. I'm quoting basically randomized controlled studies, the gold standard about how lifestyle literally can reverse type 2 diabetes in the majority of patients, and on and on. And each of these diseases, how lifestyle can have a significant effect on these. And telling people that lifestyle doesn't matter and just take the pills, I think is problematic. It wouldn't be so bad if the pills worked, and actually you can either do lifestyle or the pills. But no, the pills, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating anyone not to follow their doctor's order or to stop taking any prescription medicines. But in many cases, the pills will help with the symptoms and help people maybe feel better and everything. But in many cases, they don't do anything to reverse the chronic progressive nature of these chronic diseases, which keep getting worse and worse and worse, which when you use lifestyle instead of the pills, in many, if not the majority of the cases, you can actually slow down or even reverse these diseases with them. So it's not really an either or situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things you mentioned in the book, and we'll talk about this a little more, is when it comes to obesity, and a lot of times people are just thinking about it's just about the calories in, calories out, eat less and move more, but they're missing the picture when it comes to hormones and how big of a deal that is. And so I would love to expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, the advice that it has been given to people battling overweight or obesity for years, and sadly, it's still the advice given by our trusted medical institutions, including medical schools and expert in the area, is if you want to lose weight, just exercise more and eat less. And we can see that clearly is not working. And let's unpack that a little bit. Well, exercise more to lose weight doesn't really work. I mean, exercise has many, many, many health benefits. I'm not recommending anyone not exercise, but sadly, weight loss is not one of them, because when we exercise, we work up an appetite. We stimulate our appetite, and it makes us want to eat more. Furthermore, if I have that muffin at Starbucks that's 500 calories, I've got to exercise a lot to burn off 500 calories. So the math doesn't really work out. So then the second thing is, well, just eat less. Well, obviously, of course, if you eat less, you'll weigh less, but it's more nuanced than that. Eating less is the assumption that all calories are equal, that a calorie is just a calorie. And I believe that's wrong also, because we know that our body, specifically the hormone that responds to food called insulin, is the hormone that tells our body to store fat. Of the three types of food that we can eat, fat and protein, which are required for life, and if we don't eat those, we die, and carbohydrates, which are not required for life. The carbohydrates are the ones that maximally stimulate insulin and cause us to store fat. So if I eat a diet that's high in fat and protein, I don't gain much weight because I'm not stimulating the insulin. If I eat a diet that's high in carbohydrates, I'm telling my body to store fat all the time. I mean, as an example, 100 calories of carbohydrates, which is, sugar, starches, flour, that kind of thing, like 100 calories worth of potato chips, I eat those. And it's going to have a very different effect on my body if I eat 100 calories of a hard-boiled egg. Mm-hmm. Most people can eat one hard-boiled egg without feeling a compulsion to eat the rest of the dozen. Nobody can eat 100 calories of potato chips without wanting to eat the whole bag. And it's based on physiology and the fact that calories are not equal. And some calories make us fat and make us store fat, make us want to eat more, and some calories don't. So the idea is, it's not just eat fewer calories, it's eat calories, make your diet with the types of calories that are healthy and don't put on weight.
Yeah. I was laughing about that. No one's ever eaten chips in moderation. I've not found anyone who could do that, because I just don't have them around, because if they're around, I eat the whole thing. And I can also attest to the thing about exercising, working up your appetite. The more you do it, because I do distance and lifting. And a lot of people love to think about running to lose weight. And that's the thing that really spikes your appetite, even more so than just lifting weights. And there's nothing, and your appetite goes crazy. So that's an excellent point that a lot of times we kind of overlook and don't think about as much. And so the next thing is heart disease and cardiovascular health in general. That's on the rise, and that's kind of what ran in my family. And one of the things that perturbs me with that is the cholesterol thing of saying cholesterol is the sole cause of a lot of these various heart ailments. And you mentioned, you went into detail of this in the book and everything. So I would love to, expound on this a little bit now.
Sure. Let's divide it into two groups. Let's look at dietary cholesterol, what we eat, like in eggs, like we talked about earlier, or versus blood cholesterol. It used to be believed that eggs dietary cholesterol, eggs are high in cholesterol, raised our serum blood level cholesterol. And for many years, the recommendation is don't eat eggs, or if you're going to eat eggs, take out the yolks, because the yolks are where all the cholesterol is. So just have an egg white omelet. We still see those in restaurants to this day. But I think everyone pretty much now, it's accepted that dietary cholesterol doesn't drive serum cholesterol. So you can eat as many eggs as you want, and it's not going to change anything about your serum cholesterol. Cholesterol is such an important molecule in our body that our body has tremendous mechanisms for regulating it. So if it gets too high, we can lower it. If it gets too low, we can raise it. So dietary cholesterol, we can just take that off the table. Now, the bigger question is, does serum cholesterol drive heart disease? And that's a big issue. And our dietary recommendations, our cardiovascular prescription recommendations for the last 50 years have been based on the idea that heart disease is driven by fat, whether dietary fat or at least high fats in the bloodstream. And as a result of that, there were diets that recommended a low-fat type diet, which to this day is still recommended in various forms. And the problem with a low-fat diet is also a high-carbohydrate diet. And the high carbohydrates, as we mentioned before, what drive insulin, which drive metabolic disease. So what's wrong with fat and cholesterol as a driver for heart disease? Well, actually, they are linked with heart disease, but at a relatively small risk factor or small hazard ratio, especially when we compare it to things like smoking or things like metabolic abnormalities, like insulin resistance, things like triglycerides or HDL that we talked about before. So the point is the LDL cholesterol, or cholesterol, in my opinion, is a much smaller driver for heart disease than metabolic factors and metabolic disease. And the drivers for metabolic disease are carbohydrates. What does that mean? It means that I'm much more likely to raise my risk of getting a heart attack by eating a carbohydrate-rich diet, let's say a donut, than I am by eating something high in fat, like a steak or cheese or something like that, which goes against what people have been teaching for 50 years or more. And I think that's one of the root problems about our understanding of cardiovascular disease. And, in the book, we go down the rabbit hole of statins and, talk about those a lot. And there's a lot of misinformation there that's still driving a lot of the food recommendations and the drug recommendations as far as statins.
Yeah, I listened to a book recently on statins, but I couldn't remember all the details. I couldn't remember exactly. But isn't that, once again, kind of like, was it lobbying and things like that? That kind of like we talked about earlier, different associations and conflicts of interest with the people who are recommending that. Is that the same thing with the statins? Why that became like the go-to thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's tremendous pressure on statins. Are one of the biggest all-time selling drugs in history. In the book, we talk about it's the money spent on statins is more than the combined revenue of the NFL, the baseball, and the basketball as NBA associations. Just the amount of money is incredible. So there's tremendous amount of pressure to sell these drugs, and out of fairness to the cardiologists and the people who prescribe a lot of statins, there aren't a lot of other drugs for heart disease, that you can get, because it's mainly lifestyle. It's about, in my opinion, metabolic disease, and the same thing we've been talking about. So there aren't drugs that change metabolic disease to a significant factor. So statin is one thing that will reliably lower your LDL cholesterol in your blood. So one thing doctors can do is they can look at your blood and go, oh, you have a high LDL cholesterol. I'm going to give you a statin. I'll lower it. and then everybody feels better. The doctor feels better, the patient feels better. But there's some disturbing facts that, in large studies with hundreds of thousands of patients, most people who show up in an emergency room with a heart attack have a normal LDL cholesterol. It's not elevated. Furthermore, when some large studies of statins are coming out, one, it's showing that they drive the risk for metabolic disease, including diabetes, which is more of a risk factor for heart attacks than raised LDL cholesterol. But something else came out with just kind of the numbers. That it's a meta-analysis of several large statin studies, and it asked the questions: do people take statins? Do they have a lower risk of dying of a heart attack than somebody who doesn't take statins in large populations? And sure enough, they found, that there was. It was a small percentage, single digits, low single digits, right? So, but hey, the number one cause of death for you and me and most of our listeners is going to be a heart attack. That's statistically what it is. We may die of something else, but the numbers are, that's the biggest killer. So we want to, hey, I'll take anything that'll improve the risk. So what's the problem with that? Well, there are a lot of untoward side effects of statins. We talked about diabetes, mental things, brain fog, and all that. But there's something even more interesting. The study that showed this low single-digit improvement in mortality with people on statins, when they expanded it to look at all-cause mortality, not just dying of heart attack, they found that there was no improvement on the people in statins. What does that mean? It means that people taking statins, although they had fewer heart attacks, they still had the same mortality, which means they died of something else in greater numbers. Well, that's weird. What was that? Well, what did they die of? They died of things like suicide and traffic accidents and other things that, if you think about, statins are affecting cholesterol. Cholesterol makes up our brain, really, and many other things. Messing around with LDL cholesterol levels apparently may have effects on other types of diseases that, at least in the case of these studies, wiped out any advantage of lowering the heart attack mortality risk. Yeah. So it's a complicated story, and things are still coming in on it, but it's a big red flag for me.
Yeah, and staying with cholesterol for a bit, and I don't remember the whole study, and but I think I did see that people that live longer had higher cholesterols, and so I think it was more of a benefit maybe after age 60 to have higher than recommended levels of cholesterol. Is that something along the right line of what I'm? There's
some studies that show that as well.
Yeah. So, and another thing, if in case listeners, when you hear carbohydrates, you're talking mostly refined and processed carbohydrates.
Yeah, the bad ones that I avoid, I actually cut them all out of my diet. Pretty much are sugars, refined sugars, and then starches, which means flour, rice, grains, including grains. There are other carbohydrates and fiber in plants that are okay, and they don't have the same effect on the insulin, which is what we're really concerned about.
Yeah. Speaking on the subject of nutrition, how do you go about helping people construct an ideal diet for them? And I know there's going to be little nuances for all of us, but I guess a high level overview.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you the kind of the three recommendations that I use that sort of influence my food choices, and for me, they were transformative. They basically changed my situation with these chronic diseases, and they're the same things that other people have used with dramatic effects as well. So there are three changes in what I ate, and then one change in when I ate. The first change was when I ate. Like my mom, the dietitian, like many people today, still recommend eating many small meals throughout the day, snacking all the time, My kids get fed that at their schools. They have snack breaks all the time. Well, the first thing I did was stop snacking between meals and narrow the eating window. Eating in itself drives inflammation, and there are other factors as well. So there's a benefit of actually not eating for periods of time during the day. Some people call this intermittent fasting. So I actually stopped snacking, and then I wound up skipping breakfast. And now a lot of times I'll skip lunch too, and I'll just have lunch. I have dinner when my kids come home from school, one meal a day, and that works for me. The other thing I do is what I eat, and it's just three simple things. First of all, I cut out carbohydrates as much as possible. They're not essential. I don't need them to live, and they mainly do bad things, as far as driving insulin and everything else. And don't get me wrong, I love sweets, but I love my kids more, and I want to live to see them grow up and their grandkids. So it's worth it to give those up. So get rid of carbohydrates. The second thing I do is I get rid of things called junk seed oils, which are a type of unhealthy oil, starting out with Crisco that we referenced earlier, but includes things like canola oil, soybean oil, rapeseed oil, corn oil. There's a list of about 8 of them that are highly processed oils that are unstable at high temperature, which unfortunately almost all foods are fried in them today. So it's another reason not to eat fried foods, because they break down. But they're not just in the fried foods. They're also in almost all salad dressings. They're in, even that healthy hummus you get from Trader Joe's. Look at the side, it's got soybean oil or canola oil in them. So I avoid all those seed oils at all. And then the last thing I do is grains. I don't have celiac disease. I don't have an allergy to gluten, which is a protein on the grain. But I believe that most adults have low-grade inflammatory reactions or a low-grade allergy or inflammation to the proteins in grains, not necessarily just gluten, but some of the other ones that drives this low-grade inflammation. And by removing grains from our diet, even whole grains, we can get rid of this effect. And for some people, it's really transforming in their lives. And if that weren't enough of a reason to avoid grains, at least in the United States, most grains are literally soaked in a toxic weed killer called glyphosate from Monsanto Corporation, which is outlawed in over 35 countries around the world because of its association with cancer and other things. And then finally, grains are they're usually high in carbohydrates. So I avoid them for that reason as well.
Yeah. So what do you think about the grains, if they're organic and they're actually processed without all that? Do you think people still have that kind of that low grade inflammation still?
Well, you could get rid of the glyphosate that way. Some of the grains you can get rid of that way. They still have carbohydrates. I mean, that's what grains are, right? A lot of them have the carbohydrates, and they also have these proteins. Just by the nature of the grains, have certain proteins which for many people are gut disruptors, and they cause leaky gut, and they cause this low grade inflammation. So, I like organic, I like regenerative even more, but those labels don't reverse it for me with the grains. It's something fundamental about the grains and the proteins in it, for me at least. And people could try it, try cutting out sugars, see if you feel the difference. And you'll feel a difference in a week or so. Grains, because it's an inflammatory thing, it could take up to 3 months before you feel the difference after you stop eating grains. So don't expect, hey, I tried it for a week, nothing happened. So, and then finally, seed oils. Seed oils can stay in our body for months to years. So that can be even a longer effect, but that's still no reason not to get rid of them if you can. Seed oils, there's no added taste in them. It's not like they taste better. It's not like sugar. Oh, it's sweet. I like it. Seed oils, the only reason we use them is because they're cheap. They're cheaper than healthy oils like avocado oil or olive oil. Why are they cheap? They're cheap the same reason junk food is cheap, because corn and soybean are subsidized by our tax dollars of the food bill. So they're artificially cheaper than the healthier oils. And that's why, sadly, in many cases, junk foods are cheaper than more healthy foods, because our tax dollars underwrite the junk foods, the high fructose corn syrup that's in our Coke.
Yeah, a lot of times. A lot of times you can just follow the money, and that will give you a lot of answers. And speaking of that, a lot of times we hear that things like if we solved Alzheimer's or if we solve heart disease, we'll save X amount of dollars, add X amount of years. But really, the thing, and you pointed this out in the book as well, is aging. That's the big thing. If you solve that, pretty much a lot of these other things are going to be solved. And so, speaking of aging, you mentioned rapamycin in there. Let me rephrase that. What do you think is probably, or what's your favorite aging thing that's on the horizon now, or even right now? What do you think has the most promise?
Yeah, the book, full disclosure, I didn't intend to write a book about longevity, or I wasn't even interested in it. Although I find the older I get, the more I become interested in longevity. but the book was a book about metabolic health and lifestyle. But what I realized is the chronic diseases that are all driven by this metabolic health are actually the diseases that determine our longevity. In other words, nobody dies of old age. In fact, in the United States, you can't put old age as a cause of death on the death certificate. Doctors have to fill out death certificates when people die, and we have to write down what they died of, and we can't say old age. We have to specify things. And if we look at, like we said, statistically, what you and I and all our listeners are going to die of, it's a really short list. At the top, as we mentioned, was cardiovascular disease, stroke, and heart attack. But then below that, it's the other chronic diseases. It's cancer. It's Alzheimer's disease. So if we change our lifestyle and we adopt metabolically healthy things in our lives, and we push these chronic diseases later and later in our life, then what happens is we're gonna live longer, and that's a really exciting part, because this is now a longevity play. But then in getting more into it in the book, I realized there's a revolution in our understanding about literally aging and longevity, just like, or even more so than our revolution in our understanding of metabolic disease. In fact, they're now drugs. You referenced one of them, rapamycin, that gets at the basic metabolic signaling pathway. Because if we want to improve longevity, we have to improve our metabolic health, because it's all the same. The diseases that control longevity are the metabolic health chronic diseases. So we reverse those, we live longer. So no surprise, the most powerful anti-aging drug ever tested and shown in all animals, from yeast all the way to mammals, is rapamycin, without a question. And rapamycin works on a basic metabolic switch that called mTOR, that we talk about in the book, that improves our metabolic health. And rapamycin it's an FDA approved drug. It's been around for 25 years. But now people are taking it off label, so to speak, for longevity. In fact, I take it myself for that. I want to hedge my bets, but I believe it has a value, and there are a number of other strategies that we can use. In addition to just improving our metabolic health, there are actually specific longevity plays that are going to be really powerful, like stem cells, exosomes, regenerative medicine, partial epigenetic programming, where we rewind cells using Yamanaka factors back to their youthful state. And this has already been shown in mice to reverse types of blindness with some of Dave Sinclair's work, and now we're looking at beginning to do this with humans. So it's such an amazing time. It's so exciting. Every day I can't wait to get up and see what new breakthroughs are coming through, not only in metabolism but also in longevity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we're recording this toward the tail end of 2024, and this will be out in 2025. And so what's maybe one or two things that you're most excited about for the upcoming year?
Wow. There are, I'm excited about, I know your podcast is not a political podcast. My social media, my brand is not a political brand. So politics aside, I'm really excited that for the first time, a political party on a national level, we've suddenly heard politicians use the word seed oil in a conversation, or use the word metabolic health. And they're beginning to question the USDA and the food pyramid and the FDA and the CDC and some of our entrenched healthcare bureaucracy. I think is going to be looked at under a microscope with a focus on metabolic health. And this we've never seen in the history of the United States, really. And it's I think it's going to transform things. And this is not, it's one political party that's done this, but it's not a political thing. Everybody, the Democrats and the Republicans, they should both get behind this, because this is for all of us. Our health is not a political issue. It shouldn't be. But I'm super excited about that. And I'm going to be talking to Robert Kennedy, who's in line, as you know, to become the Health and Human Services Secretary, overseeing essentially everything. And it looks like he's going to be appearing on my podcast. So I'm going to be asking him some questions about that this spring.
I can't wait to listen to that, because I'm highly interested in that as well. And I'm interested in it for a lot of reasons. One, because like you mentioned, those reasons, bringing this stuff up to a national stage, I'm really excited about that. But two, there's also a curiosity to me to see if people can put egos aside and actually work together on something. That's going to be the ultimate litmus test, because a lot of times, unfortunately now, health has become political. Of all things, fitness has become political. You're leaning if you do this type of fitness activity, this means you lean toward this side of the political aisle. And it was the craziest thing that I've seen. So I'm really curious to see if people are going to put egos aside and come together on something that is pretty strong in terms of data of like, hey, what we've been doing, the numbers don't lie. It's been a steadily decline, and it's been veering down any category you can look at. It's been declining. So I'm really curious to see if grownups can play together.
Exactly. Well, I think we all have to be open-minded and humble and realize that we don't know anything. We still haven't figured it out. I mean, for the first time in recent history, the obesity rates have started to level off and started to go down. From at the time of this broadcast, a Journal of the American Medical Association article just mentioned that, is this a blip in the growth of obesity going up, or are we starting to see the effects of GLP-1 agonists and Ozempic, finally doing what, nothing else has been able to do in combating this epidemic?
Yeah. And as we get ready to wind down here, this is just another question that just pops up in my head is, how has it been to become much more prominent on social media and all this other things now? Did you what's been your biggest revelation with that? And with that, because I'm sure you didn't think years ago that, hey, I'm going to be more active on social media with podcasts and all these things. And so so how's that been?
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting, because it's something I never had an experience with. I hadn't posted on Twitter before. A couple years ago now, I have a couple 100,000 or over 100,000 followers, and I'm so it's like, it's a new thing, but it's fun learning new things like this. And I think the ability to float ideas out there, and it's not just Twitter, X, it's, LinkedIn, Twitch, Blue Sky, take your pick, YouTube, Instagram, on and on, Threads. They're all good, but it allows people to float ideas and then get immediate feedback. And some of it's trolling, but some of it's really good, and just seeing the ideas and the rapid turnaround of ideas that, a scientific paper comes out and 6 people start talking about it. It's so exciting. I think it's energizing. I think, and it's changing the way we do science. It's changing the way that information gets out to people. And I think it's, for the most part, positive. And I'm really hopeful and excited for the future about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a great way to stay current. It's a great way to just learn different topics. And because usually they put an idea out there and it gets your curiosity, at least with me. And then I go do further studying on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what I've used. I mean, there's so many different things that I've learned just from some random anonymous Twitter account that puts an idea. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Is this true? Let me go look this up. And there's a whole bunch of research on it. Like, oh my goodness, I didn't know about this. So I think it's cool. And so the last question here is pretty random, but I want you to pretend that you're having a glass of wine or that you're having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea with someone. And these are three people that you can invite with you to share for a conversation. And they could be dead or alive, but it has to exclude friends or family. Who would you invite to have this conversation?
Oh wow! Well, I'd pick Leonardo da Vinci. Boy, I like Albert Einstein. He's not a medicine part one, and then for the third one, I'm not sure. I'd probably pick a spiritual figure of some sort, of some spiritual path. I'm not religious, but I'd like to think I'm spiritual. So I would invite someone from there,
Yeah.
Maybe somebody from Göbekli Tepe to tell us why they're building megaliths 12,000 years ago when they're hunter-gatherers and we're not supposed to have advanced civilizations,
I definitely need every single brain cell for that conversation. I need every single. I need to be supremely cognitively optimized for that conversation right there. So, but thank you so much for joining me. This has been an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed everything that we went over. And so, where are outlets that listeners can keep up with you at?
Oh yeah, my website is Robert Lufkin, Luf as in Frank, KINMD.com. You can download a sample chapter of my book there with audio and PDF forms. I'm active on social media. My wife says I'm too active, but you can follow me there and say hi.
Oh man. So I will have all that in the show notes. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. Listeners out there, stay awesome, be limitless. And as always, go be the CEO of your health and life. Peace.